Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the European Parliament. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here because I know that people got on the bus at 6 in the morning to come to Brussels. So it's a great pleasure to have you here today. I also like to welcome the people who are following our conference on the internet. So this is a very important issue. So why is there so much about nuclear issues on the 5th of February? Months without nothing, but this morning we had a whole conference that was organised by Rebecca Harms, my former colleague. She is here, and she'll speak a bit later on, of course. She's worked a lot on nuclear, and there was a report that was done by the Greens and Heinrich Böll, dealing with nuclear waste throughout the world with a focus on Europe. But you'll talk more about that, Rebecca, later on. So here we want to focus on radioactive waste and storage of that waste, particularly that in deep geological levels. It's a great pleasure to have Mr. Gariba with us here today. He's the director of the ITER directorate. And we love ITER. You're part of ITER as well. And we love security. So you're a very important man to us. We know one another for a long time now. And there's a directive on nuclear waste. And in that directive, we ask member states to present national plans to talk about how they classify radioactive waste so that we can standardize that, and also to talk about the solutions for the storage of nuclear waste. I'm going to give you a brief introduction now before we move on to the debate. What surprises me is that there are lots of demonstrations to fight against global warming, particularly young people. We had COP21 as well. We talk about various measures to reduce greenhouse gases, and we see that in the various scenarios produced by the IPC and others, there are scenarios where there is mention of nuclear power. And I think it's very important to speak about this and to raise awareness among young people to say that it's true that there is an urgent need to fight against climate change, but we need to talk about whether nuclear can be one of the solutions or not. And honestly, personally, when we look at the problem of the storage of waste, and if we take account of the fact that we've been producing nuclear waste for 60 years now, and that we have no real solution other than to bury it, that we have no real solution for it. And I want to talk to you about a range of countries, France, Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, who have been have found an agreement on green taxonomy. So there are some countries who wanted nuclear energy to be classified as being a green renewable source of energy. But they've agreed, in any case, on criteria which state that there must be no significant harm done by an economic activity. Such an activity cannot be considered harmless if significant harm, long-term harm, is caused to the environment. So if that's the criterion, in the case of nuclear waste, there's clearly a problem, because it does create a threat to the environment in the long term, par excellence. So this problem of storage sites, Mr. Gariba, we're going to ask you a few questions because Europe is in favour of these deep geological repositories. I've visited a lot of these. I was in Bua recently. I'd invite you to go to Bua, Mr. Gariba. because you go 500 meters underground in clay soils, and there you can see all of the structural engineering problems that causes. Because when I went down into the coal mines, for example, you can see that coal is robust. It's the same in diamond mines. I've visited them. I went to the WIP as well in the USA. I'll talk to you about that. These are salt mines. There is bracing there with wood, but it's solid. And Mr. Sval will talk about Sweden. There they have granite, but clay is friable. And they pour in massive quantities of cement, concrete. And in 2016, they almost had an accident, or they did have an accident. And there's going to be more concrete in this thing than radioactive waste. That's how much they need. And since the early 2000s, there hasn't been much in the way of studies about any of this. And so there's a reductionist approach to all of this. So a study on the heat is carried out in terms to test the resistance of clay. And then they check the hydrogen levels in the steel that has the waste in it. So there are these piecemeal approach to the studies. But no experiments are being carried out that test for everything, not just for hydrogen or one single element. And the situation is worse if you test for everything at once than if you test for single issues. Then at the Bondayuka Mountains in the USA, where used waste is stored there, it's inert. It's a different type of waste from what we have in Europe. Whether it be the Yucca Mountains or the WIP, which is in the US as well, for medium level nuclear waste, there was a fire there in the WIP. In Sweden, there was a problem as well. In Germany as well. So there is no storage site that does not create any problems. They all create problems, and we're going to hear various experts on all of this, and we're particularly going to look at France as well, thanks to the people from BUA who have joined us today. We're going to talk about Belgium as well, and Sweden. Those are the countries we're going to focus on. So, to begin with, you're going to hear Mr. Gariba, who will tell you what the European Commission is doing, and why the Commission needs the members of the European Parliament to challenge the member states in their activities, because the European Commission helped us a lot with Fukushima when the Commission asked for stress tests. You know that one of the countries that was most opposed to this was France, because for the French government, nuclear power is a national issue and not a European issue. But when there is a nuclear accident, as we saw with Chernobyl, the nuclear clouds cross borders, and so therefore it has to be a European responsibility, increasingly, far more than a national one. Then we're going to hear about the three aspects of deep geological repositories. We're going to hear about France from Mr. Thuillier. My colleague Joanne Swan is going to talk to us about Sweden, and then Jan van der Putte will afterwards talk us about Belgium. So I'll now give the floor to Tilly Metz. She's a Luxembourg parliamentarian, and then we're going to hear from a German parliamentarian, and she will join us later. So go ahead, Tilly. Thank you very much, Michèle. Thanks for having invited me. So I come from Luxembourg, where we don't have nuclear facilities, and that's it's part of our history as Greens in Luxembourg. We were born from the fight where we fought against the opening of such a facility. And I was a mayor in Luxembourg, and I can tell you that Cattenom was just over the border. I could see it from my window, one of the biggest nuclear facilities in France. But when you couldn't see Cattenom directly, you could see the clouds that it was generating. It's one of the biggest, and I think one of the oldest as well, of France, this Cattenom facility. So in any case, for me, it's clear that investing in nuclear facilities is a short-term approach to energy. We know that it's a finite nuclear resource, and it will be exhausted if usage continues as it is. Will be exhausted in 40 years. We have a lot of problems with the extraction, the enrichment, and the transport of uranium. It is toxic to the environment, and also mining it generates CO2 and destroys the natural heritage while destroying the local populations as well. Think of the Inuits in Canada and others. But focusing now on the waste, that's what we're about today. We have high levels of radiation from this waste. Taking the example of Belgium, it produces 120 tons of nuclear waste per year, which is a lot. And the burial of nuclear waste costs the Belgian government more than 9 billion. So highly radioactive waste which is buried, and that damages the soil. And then there is surface storage in barrels, which we know is a dangerous procedure as well. There were 10,000 radioactive leaks in a recent period. 50,000 barrels were thrown into the ocean over a 10-year period. Now, we don't know where they are, where they're floating or anything. Then beyond that, there's plutonium, which is generated during nuclear fission. And this, as you know, is also the basis for atomic bombs. So each country which can have a nuclear power plant is capable of producing nuclear weapons. And in Germany, Rebecca Harms will talk to us about that. The dismantling of nuclear power plants generates radioactivity. All the bitumen, the construction materials, all of this is radioactive as well. I'll just give you a couple of figures to close. 6.6 million cubic meters of waste are produced in Europe over the lifetime of our current nuclear facilities in Europe. So that's how immense the problem is. Just to give you some more, that was just a few figures I wanted to give you. I'll give you